Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. Hey everyone, here we are again studying the book of Ecclesiastes. We studied chapter 1 last week where we discussed the word hevel for the word vanity. And we also discussed a few scientific facts that who we believe Solomon wrote about. And we talked about the phrase he uses, there's nothing new under the sun. And then, of course, we found the love of Christ. So this week, we're going to study chapter 2. We're going to go ahead and read the chapter again, and we're going to do that every week as well.
All right, so I'm reading from the English Standard Version, and like Dee said, we are starting in chapter 2, verse 1. I said in my heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself." But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, "It is mad," and of pleasure, "What use is it?" I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female servants and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind.
Wow.
Yes, it's lengthy.
Well, no, not that, but the author, Solomon, he is so focused on himself.
For sure.
Everything is, look what I've done. I've done this, but then this bad thing happens. And I think I mentioned in last episode, that's why I think Solomon wrote it in his later years. I look back and think, man, I should have done some things differently. Or I shouldn't have done what I've done, or I should have done what I didn't do. So I can kind of hear that in his voice here, but more, he's like, man, look at everything I've done. I've done it all. I've been there. I've done that. And for what?
Yeah.
And it's, look, me.
Oh, yeah, but I feel like it shifts at the end there, because that's where he said, verses 24 through 26, he talks about, the only place you're going to get blessings from is God. I love how, as we go through this, really, I know I recommended before reading it all in one setting, but like the opposite, well, not the opposite, there's like a parallel principle here. Like it's dangerous to take these verses and just dissect them one at a time without looking at the broader context, because this is not a good book to go verse by verse and break it down. But we talked about different literary writings, how things are written differently. And so this book, really, it is about the whole picture, chapter 1 through the end.
Yeah.
But we are doing this in chapter chunks. But we have put them into these bite-sized portions. They're a bigger bite than typical. But when we look at it in the context, like what you said, like he's like, oh, me, look at all this stuff I've done and I'm considering, and where's God in all this? And at the end, it's like he ties it up in a nice little bow, like, okay, here's my conclusion on this. And I feel like the person that portioned this out by verse, because of course we know that's not always how things were done originally with the original manuscripts and that kind of thing, or the original writings, and then the manuscript, someone else came in behind and designated verses and chapters. And so I feel like they did a good job there. I was trying to think of a theme throughout this particular chapter. Did you see one?
Yeah, it's self-satisfaction with temporary things. Like everything that he fusses about is temporary, and it left a void in what he did. He in his quote unquote search in wisdom. I don't know what exactly he means by that. It kind of confuses me. When I first read it, I think, oh yeah, I understand what he's trying to say. But then I go back and I'm like,
oh, verse 3 threw me for a loop. I've read this my whole life, and where he says, I searched my heart how to cheer my body with wine. And then there's this little dash, and it says, my heart's still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. And he's saying, like, I'm searching out how to make pleasure with wine, and my heart was still guiding me with wisdom. I'm like, no. If you look at any of the Proverbs, which he wrote, he talks about, don't look at wine as it sparkles in the cup. And the Bible never says anything positive. It might say neutral things about wine, but most of the time when you see wine, it's about like the evils of wine or things that happen when you drink wine. We do have the account of Jesus turning water to wine. But that's a whole word study for a different time on wine and the fact that it's not differentiated between alcoholic and non-alcoholic. But Solomon wrote all that, and that verse really messed with my mind. So just so y'all know, it's not like we have it all figured out.
no.
We still are confused by passages. If you have a take on that, please feel free to chime in. But the way that I kind of looked at it is just like any other account. When we think about the account of the judges, and the things that they did, God doesn't condone everything that we find in Scripture. Unless it says he does, we can't read that into it.
Right.
And so this might be an example where he's saying that he felt like he was doing that. And he talks about everything, finding pleasure in wine is folly.
Right. I wonder though, like, so he acquired all this wisdom. Is he going, okay, you know what? Let me just try it all. See what's good, see what's not. And wisdom guiding him there. And then having the effects of what the wine did, got him to write those proverbs about it, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know what,
Yeah. And also, we talk about words. Sometimes we don't break down words as much because then it gets too tedious for us and for y'all. But that word wisdom there can also be translated skill. So, there's that as well. And I don't know that it's necessarily translated that way here, but I know throughout this chapter there are a couple other places where that word might fit a little better in the context. But that's just something else to consider. Now,
And also, I was thinking too, because like I said, he got all this wisdom, but he didn't have the experience. In Proverbs, there's so many verses that say, get wisdom, get understanding. So, in his wisdom that he got, in all these temporary and self satisfying experiences, he got understanding. And then realized this ain't
It's
what
vanity.
it's cut out to be. Yeah, it's vanity is,
Yeah.
like you said, he tied it up in a red bow at the end.
But I looked up the word wisdom, and in the book of Proverbs, it is there in 45 verses. It may be there more than that many times. It might be more than once in a verse. But the word wisdom is there 45 verses. In Ecclesiastes, it's in 26 verses. And the word wise is in Proverbs 55 verses, and in Ecclesiastes 22 verses. And then it drops when you get to knowledge. In Proverbs, it's 40 verses. Ecclesiastes, it's 8 verses. And I was just interested because he talked about madness and folly. And the word fool is in Ecclesiastes 13 verses. I keep saying times. It's not times. It's in that many verses. And the word folly is in there 7 verses, which I thought for a short book like this, that's quite a bit. And we know this is wisdom literature. And so he is really laying heavy on the importance of wisdom. But what's funny here, to me at least, is he's saying even wisdom is folly. Like, it does not matter. But I think the key phrase here is at the end of verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun, which puts it in context. There's nothing to be gained outside of heaven. And so when we're striving for all these things, because when you go to the end of the chapter, he talks about there's nothing better in verse 24. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give it to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. God wants us to enjoy things. Mm-hmm. It's not like he's saying we should live a droll existence. I mean, as Christians, we're called to have this joy, and this peace that passes understanding. And if we're just droll and, it's all vanity, and that's our whole attitude, that's not being Christ-like. Christ enjoyed his life, I would think. We don't have anything that says otherwise. I guess we don't have anything that says Jesus just really enjoyed being here. But he loved people. I mean, he wept when Lazarus died, and he knew he was bringing him back. Jesus experienced human emotion, and I would think there was joy in there. But I think where we get hung up as humans is that we take the focus off of God and godly living and spending eternity with him, and we shift it like he has done here to the earthly joys, and we don't know we're doing it even. Like, sometimes it's like, I love being with my Christian brothers and sisters. I love going to fellowship meals. I love having game night. I love going to retreats and all these things. And those are all wonderful, great things, having fellowship with your brothers and sisters. But if that's your main focus, that's going to end. That's got a time limit. It's got a stamp on it, a beginning and an end point. And it's vanity. I mean, if our life is but a breath, if it's but a vapor, anything inside of that is even smaller than a vapor because it's only a small portion of our life. It's that focus. It's, knowing, because we say wisdom is the application of knowledge, right? I've heard that my whole life. Wisdom is the application of knowledge. And so I was wondering, inside the context of what he has said here, if he's saying he's got a hold of it and he's doing all this stupid stuff or this worldly stuff, is he really wise here? But I thought about how he said he considered wisdom and madness and folly. Madness is, like, we would define that as insanity, and I don't know if you've ever read, like, the colloquial definition, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Yeah. And so I thought that would be interesting here, although that would be reading into the text, and I don't want to do that. But I do think the principle does apply there. He knows that doing all these things over and over again, the end is vanity. But as we look throughout this book, that's going to be the answer for everything. Literally everything. So y'all are going to hear that
for the next 10 chapters.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned the number of times wisdom and knowledge and comparing Proverbs to Ecclesiastes. Now, Proverbs has 31 chapters and Ecclesiastes has 12. So that's
a high concentrated dosage. Yeah. That's what I was thinking, because I was like, man, it is more in Proverbs. Like if you look at wisdom 45 verses 26. Ratio, that's huge. 26 is a lot more for 12 chapters than 45 for 31.
Yeah, true. So more than double.
But when I was wondering, based off of how much does he mention wisdom as compared to folly? He mentions if you combine wisdom and wise, we're going to do some math here, and knowledge, that is 56 times in Ecclesiastes, wisdom, wise, and knowledge. Fool is only mentioned, fool or folly, 20 times.
Together, you mean?
Yeah, together. It's 20 times total for fool and folly. Wisdom, wise, and knowledge was 56.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's definitely an emphasis there, I think. And that's just the verses. That's not necessarily how many times it was mentioned inside of a verse. It might be mentioned, I don't know, I didn't dig that deep because I didn't want to. Sorry, guys. If you want to, feel free to.
But let us know.
Yeah, please let us know. But I loved, for this episode, I jumped back and forth between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes so much. And I feel like I'll do that for the whole book. I love, of course, Proverbs 1, verses 1 through 7. And then if you jump over to chapter 8, verse 11, I love all of Proverbs 8.
Yeah.
When you look at that contrasted to it's a personification of wisdom, Lady Wisdom.
Oh, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then Lady Folly or Woman Folly is mentioned in 9 verses 13 through 23. And I just love the contrast there. I highly doubt many of us really think of folly when we are being fools, and how much folly is coming from what we're doing.
Well, no.
But I wonder, I wonder how often we think about wisdom when we are being wise. But God is the author of all wisdom. I don't know if we think of it that way, but we should. There isn't a wise decision that has not come from God, one way or another. James 1:5 we know. And if you look at Proverbs 2:6, we're connecting all the dots. I feel like pairs with that very well. It says, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And then if you jump over to Proverbs 3, 13 through 23, kind of gives you, blessings for the person that finds wisdom. But right there, sandwiched in between all that, in 19 and 20, it says, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew. To me, that's a really pretty map. I guess a very neat line that you can draw between those. And then, of course, because we're going to jump one more time, if you look in 1 Corinthians 1:18 and 25. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. And then jump over to 25. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
I like 13 and 14. It says, then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and we're supposed to shine our lights also. That's excelling darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all. God is not a respecter of persons.
Right.
Right here, we get the idea that, you may be wise, Solomon, but, you're going to die just like the other person dies. You're going to work just like the other person works, and you're going to do this just like the other person does. So it's all a matter of godly wisdom versus worldly wisdom.
Right, but even then, with godly wisdom, I mean, we've talked about this before. I tend to emphasize learning a lot. I mean, I'm a homeschool mom, so that's kind of my day job. But I really do love learning. Like, just as an individual, I'm intellectually driven. But the gaining of knowledge, just purely for the gaining of knowledge, is folly. And to me, that's the trap I fall into. Like, I love digging up these little things, but if I'm not applying it, it doesn't matter. And if my focus isn't where it needs to be, and that's drawing closer to God, it doesn't matter. Just like we were talking about this before we started recording, when we look at Christianity and what Christianity should be, and how like our central kind of theme is love. God is love, and he loves us, and this is why we are alive. This is why he has provided salvation and all these things. And even if we have like another principle from Christianity that is right, and we emphasize that incorrectly, if we are not love driven, if we are not motivated by like the purest form of love, not like worldly love, but if we're not driven by that, then it shifts everything to the point. I think the analogy was used, it's like a zipper. You have to start at the beginning piece, and if you miss that one, like say you start quarters of the way up the zipper, yeah, you zipped it. It feels off.
Mm-hmm.
It looks off. It is off, and you end without actually ending, if that makes any sense in any way.
Because you have that leftover track.
Yeah, you have the leftover track at the bottom. It's weird.
Yeah.
You know, is it zipped somewhat?
Sure.
Yeah. Is it zipped properly? No. You know, is it the way it should be? No. And the same can be said, like when our focus and our reasoning for doing the things we do, whether that be gaining wisdom or, you know, it's not, wisdom is not our final goal. Our final goal is serving God and living for him and then being with him in eternity. Wisdom gets us there. It's a vehicle.
Right.
But when we take it, and I'll say this a lot of times, I don't know if I've said it on here, like we start worshiping, not creation above the creator, but I feel like the Pharisees, they turned the law into an idol.
So in verses 18 through 23, I think we've all felt this at some point. He's depressed to me. He just seems like, you know, all this great stuff, and I wanted to leave it to someone, but then realizes, oh, no one's going to appreciate this. All he's done, all his material blessings. I mean, he's just now depressed, and these verses to me were kind of tough to read, because it appeared that Solomon seemed to struggle with knowing he would have to give up all these things in his quote unquote wisdom, and he acquired all this. He kind of got attached to it, you know, and now he's like, wait a minute, I'm not taking this to heaven with me, or I'm not taking this to Sheol after death. And so what was the whole point? But then he starts to get a grasp of it all in verses 24. You know, there's nothing better for man than that he should eat and drink. But seeing that true enjoyment comes from God.
Right, he says that in 25, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment.
And that's just sad.
And
we go through that too.
For sure. And I mean, Jesus taught about it in Matthew 6:24. If you look at Luke 16:13 as well, it talks about, you know, we can't have two masters. We either love God and hate money, or the opposite, basically, which a lot of times it's the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
We tend to get so caught up. And when I wrote down my notes, I labeled that section verses 18 through 23, the vanity of getting attached to the world. That's what he did. You can see the attachment there. This is an experiential kind of knowledge here. This is not just, I know 2 + 2 = 4. This is, I am 4.
Right.
And just, it's hard. You can taste or feel. Like it's a tangible tone there. It's very bleak. I don't want my kids to taste that heartbreak, but even more, I don't want them to taste the heartbreak that's going to come if they don't give up these desires and this attachment. We're told in the New Testament we cannot be of the world. We're in it, but we can't be of it.
Verse 5 hits hard because I have a vegetable garden and I have flowers in it. So it's like I get so excited every day, go home from work and I see it and I'm like, oh, look, I've planted the broccoli, or I planted these tomatoes, and look at my flower garden. And I'm thinking, this is nothing like what Solomon has done on a very simple, small scale. I'm like, oh, I can't imagine all that he's done. I can understand completely how he would get attached to that.
Oh, yeah. We cannot see God. We can see his creation, and his creation, verse 24 through 26, was meant to bless us. God put that here for our enjoyment. He wanted us to have it, but we can't turn that into God. And I'm not saying you're turning your garden into God. I don't think that about you. But I mean, it's easy to lose focus. It's extremely easy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very easy for us to point out where other people have lost focus. I don't know, just looking at verse 20, gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Who hasn't felt like that?
Mm-hmm.
I cannot count the amount of times I have given up my heart to despair. And poor, pitiful me. And look at what's happened. Look what has been taken. And I think about Job, another wisdom lit book, where he told his wife, should we not accept the evil or the bad with the good? The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And that should be our attitude with all things. But at the same time, we have to give ourselves grace. We are human. And there's a point at which you can be grieved and it not be sin.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be in despair and it not be sin. It's all in the attitude and the perspective. And, God knows we're human.
Okay, so where do you find the love of Christ?
I see it in verses 18 through 23, which is, I think, a little bit of a weird place to see it.
Yeah, I was thinking, really?
It is so depressing, which if you don't know me, I struggle with anxiety and depression. Dee knows this about me. And some really heavy things that come with that. And I see it there because I can relate to him, but I also see it there because God has given us a way out of that. God has given in us a desire to reach for more, to reach higher. I feel like that's innate in human beings. It doesn't necessarily mention that here, and maybe I'm painting a little outside the lines here, but I really do feel that. I don't feel that. I think that. I think that God has given us this innate desire to go beyond the temporal, to search for something that is bigger than ourselves. And I think that because of that, we can have hope. When we really sit down and think about it, like Solomon has gone through all this. He has tested all the things. And God preserved this for us so that we can read it. So that's a blessing in and of itself. I see the love there. But outside of him preserving it, he's gone through all these things and tested them. And he still has this void within himself that he knows needs to be filled. And it's a God-shaped hole. And only a God-shaped peg is going to take care of it. And I think all of us have the ability to come to that realization. I think God gives that to us. Does that make sense? Is that way too wacky?
No.
Okay.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
I see it in verses 13 and 14 when he says, "Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness." Because, like I said earlier, Jesus says he's the light of the world. It's almost like he's peeking in right here. Like, hey, here's a hint. And then the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same thing happens to them all. I'm not saying this is interchangeable, but oftentimes the word heart is meant for like the head, I guess.
That's what we would say. Our Christian heart is our mind.
Right. So, the wise man's eyes are in his head, in his heart. So God said he would write his law upon his people's hearts and he would be their God. So that's where I see it, because it's just kind of a, like I said, a sneak preview of Jesus going, I'm right here. Look. And everything, and I'm not a respecter of persons. So make sure your wise eyes are in your head, in your heart. That God's law is written in your heart.
All right, well, that does it. I will say I was planning to give you homework. If you haven't, please go read Proverbs 2 and 8 and even 9. And if you want to do past that, you can go look up all the passages on wisdom in Proverbs, since we believe these are the same writer. I think that will help you and further your study here. But as always, we are so thankful that you have joined us today. If you have any questions or comments or anything you want to say to us, really, please feel free to contact us. We would love to study with you or connect you to someone local to you if you're not local to us. And we hope that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your own.
If you like this episode, be sure and share it with someone. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.